Do you have many pedophiles in your program?
Yes, we have a fair number.
In your business, do you conclude that pedophiles are incurable?
Well, I'm the director. I'm the executive director of this program. I'm not the clinical expert. Now, I've got a good clinician who maybe someday you should talk to about that. She's a very, very sophisticated and very well studied and well versed in the area of sex offender treatment. And I think the jury is still out. I can tell you that most professionals will tell you that, clinicians will tell you that pedophiles are very, very difficult to treat. But I don't think we ever say never in terms of treatment. We are learning more and more about what works and what doesn't work with sex offenders, pedophiles, and others every day. I think the assessment tools are becoming more and more sophisticated, more and more accurate. I think the tools to and technology to adequately supervise sex offenders if they are released back into the community with GPS, with plethysmographs or the Peter meter, polygraphs are very, very helpful in terms of who is responding to treatment and who isn't. So we have tools today that we didn't even have 5 years ago. And we're starting to do research around this issue, and I think much of the treatment is now research-based and research-driven. So in terms of best practices, what works, what doesn't work. So we're getting a lot better at delivering much better treatment to this group, and hopefully we'll start to see some people that work their way through that treatment and their risk is reduced, and ultimately the court decides whether or not they get out of my program.
You mentioned several instruments. What do they do?
Well, the polygraph, for instance, somebody who's in the program or released from the program. Now, other systems, we have had nobody in the community. We have one person who has been placed in what we call community preparation service, which is a residence outside of the secure perimeter down at the St. Peter facility, but it's still on the St. Peter grounds. And that person is able to work in a shop, go shopping. He's always escorted. He goes to outpatient treatment during the week. And that's where you would use the polygraph to determine, you know, what is his thought pattern or thought process as it pertains to the type of deviancy that led to his civil commitment. Does he still fantasize about children, or not necessarily this offender, but for instance would be if you have a pedophile, for instance, they would polygraph them and ask them about their fantasies and how they're managing that, and you can get at the truth.
What about a couple of other instruments that you mentioned?
Well, the plethysmograph, I'm not that familiar with that tool, but it's a, I guess what people would probably heard it referred to as a Peter meter. It's plethysmograph, and there are people that are professionally trained in using that instrument, and it's a tool that is used by clinicians across the country in these programs.
Okay. So, well, then let's see. Now, do I understand that the courts determine when these individuals leave your program?
Correct. There's a process, and the process is the civil commit or his attorney can ask for a hearing before a special review board. The special review board then gathers information, and they make a recommendation now to the Supreme Court appeal panel. And the Supreme Court appeal panel would then ultimately decide whether or not to move this person to the next level, which would be the community preparation service program. But that law just changed this past legislative session. Before, it used to be the Commissioner of Human Services made that decision. So it's now been bucked up to the court. The commissioner can comment. Obviously, the county attorney can appeal any decision that is made at that level too. But that's kind of the process in is through the courts, process out is through the courts, which is, I think, a reasonable way to manage both how you get in and how you exit the program.
If you're just joining us, my guest is Dennis Benson, who is the executive director of the Minnesota Sex Offenders Program. We're trying to unravel this bit to find out just what happens to a sex offender in Minnesota. Dennis, you mentioned the number that you have in the program. Can you talk about what kind of, not recognize that you are not the psychologist or anything of the sort, you're the executive director, I understand that. But can you talk about what happens to the individual in the way of treatment to kind of move them from your program back to the community?
Well, it's the mode of treatment or the best practice suggests now that people move through the program in levels, and everybody moves at a different pace. It's not a cookie cutter approach to treatment, and that seems to be the model that other systems have had a fair amount of success with across the country. The Sand Ridge program in Mauston, Wisconsin, our neighbors to the east, use that model, and they have a reasonably good program and reasonably good results. I think they're ahead of many civil commit programs across the country. There are 21 states that have civil commit programs, and now the federal government has started a program as well. So it's an emerging field, and it's a very different treatment than, for instance, we used in the prison system that I spent 34 years in. We had sex offender treatment for prisoners as well, but it's a little bit different approach. The people that are committed to my program are there for treatment. In prison, you have the choice whether or not you want to participate in treatment. In my program, it's all treatment. Now, you can refuse to participate. You have that right because technically your civil rights have been restored. You're out from under that criminal commitment and you're civilly committed, so you have the right to say, no, I'm not going to go to treatment. Reality is that release process probably isn't going to serve you well if you choose not to participate in treatment. So the crux of the treatment, as I understand it, and again, I'm an old prison warden and a deputy commissioner, I'm not a clinician, and I don't pretend to be, but it's really trying to get these people to look at how they think and how they manage their fantasies and their drive to commit sex offenses, how to manage that differently. A clinician explained it to me just a few weeks ago, and it made some sense to me. We talk a lot about alcoholics and alcoholism, and we've all heard the alcoholic say, when I get up in the morning, the only thing I can think about is having a drink and getting a drink. And as they get sober, they say the same thing. I think about that taste and getting that drink all day long. And I work hard all day long at suppressing that, and taking it one day at a time, staying sober. And for many of these deviant sex offenders, it's the same thing. Imagine getting up and the only thing you can think about is grooming a little boy or a little girl for sex, or stalking a female for the purpose of sex. And that puts it into perspective for me. It really is a thought process that is difficult for us to imagine because it's so foreign to us. I mean, most of us have pretty normal approaches to the kind of sexual relationship we want to have with the opposite sex. So we can't get in touch with just how difficult that is. I've